to World at Work TV. I'm Allison Avalos, and I'm joined today by Scott Behson from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and we're talking a little bit about work-life policies. Scott, let's start off by talking a little bit about how organizations can build work-family values into their HR practices and management of those programs.
Right, so it's one thing if organizations are going to develop a work-life policy that's kind of a standalone work-life policy, but I find it's much more effective when organizations really embed things like flexibility and these types of values into their overall approach to management and human resource management. So for example, if we embed flexible work and enabling people to work remotely or from places other than the office or hours other than 9 to 5, we're helping people with their work-family balance and work-family juggles, but we're not necessarily creating a work-life policy. Same thing if we have performance evaluations that really focus on performance and outcomes and deliverables, then we could care less about, chair time or, being around the office enough to be seen, which is obviously one of the problems with performance management in organizations. So the more we can embed kind of the values of being flexible and being supportive into our everyday management practices, the more effective it's going to be, because it's not going to be like HR's little standalone work-family add-on nice to have. It becomes embedded in what we do as an organization, and it ties to business goals and is something that can get buy-in from many other departments and stakeholders.
So it sounds like there's a philosophical shift from keeping the work-life specific programs sort of compartmentalized to really letting that filter into the rest of your work you're doing in the HR space.
I think it probably has to start with kind of a work-life theming. I mean, we're not going to develop parental leave policies or things like that just kind of out of the blue. But in order to really become part of what the organization does, it needs to get embedded into these other practices. Because, again, if a manager or a supervisor looks at this as, this is yet another thing I have to pay attention to, or it's coming from some office I don't have an accountability towards, then they're less likely to really feel like this is an important part of the business and central to what they're doing. So I think it's really important, again, to move beyond just having it as a standalone type of approach. It's important to have parenting resource groups, and it's important to have parental leave, and it's important to have diversity and inclusion programs, but that's not enough. It needs to migrate into the other things we do in our organizations.
So as we think more about some of the specific programs that you mentioned, how can organizations, what are the roadblocks they need to overcome to ensure the greatest effectiveness of those programs?
So a few common roadblocks include kind of the messaging around work and life programs, secondly, around engaging multiple stakeholders, and third, about metrics and how we measure these things. And to me, I think the most important, the one that kind of encompasses the rest, is thinking through the stakeholders. So it's easy to think about work-life programs as we're doing this for our working parents or we're doing it for our employees. But we have to remember that, if we have an employee who goes on an extended leave, that impacts the frontline supervisor. So how can we minimize the impact on the frontline supervisor so they can still be effective? And if we do that, right, then we're creating a bridge to that stakeholder and engaging them in this. And also, as I was saying before, if it's just an HR policy or it comes out of the HR department solely, then why should business unit heads or other executives or people from other functional areas really care about this or buy in? So if we engage these various stakeholders, we think about what measures are important to them, what can we help them with. So for top management, it might be turnover, it might be looking at revenue, it might be looking at attraction of key types of employees, it might be kind of the financial measures. And if we engage that in the front of the process, right, then they're engaged, and that's a stakeholder that will no longer be a roadblock, but will be an enabler. And one project I've been involved in, working with a client, they implemented a fairly extensive parental leave program for both moms and dads and adoptive parents. It's great. I'm so happy they have this policy. And they were a bit frustrated because there wasn't a lot of uptake on it. So then we developed with them training and orientation for both the expected parents and their supervisors. And it helps them talk through the transition plans for their work, for their keep in touch strategy while they're away, for how the work is going to be transitioned to others and then transitioned back when they return, but also then helping the employee deal with the transition to becoming a working parent and thinking through the resources they might need at home. But the fact that we engage both the employee and the supervisor in these trainings, right? Engage them, and then it helps the supervisor and the work team know that, things aren't going to fall through the gap. I am going to know who I could go to for this information or that information. We're going to be okay for the next 2 months without this employee. And once you've kind of established that everybody else's needs are at least being met or addressed, then a lot of these roadblocks kind of go away.
So you're starting to hit on something we hear a lot, which is you can have very appropriately designed programs for what an organization's looking to achieve. But if they're not communicated well, then you lose on that value add for the employee value proposition and really what you're hoping to accomplish, and the perceived value of that program can really be diminished. Talk a little bit about how organizations can position themselves and maybe even some of the tactics associated with doing that part of this well.
Okay, so communication is one thing. So enrolling people to first off know that you have these policies in place, because that's a critical problem in so many organizations, that they develop policies and then they're not really promoted properly throughout the organization. In my world, where I focus a lot on work family for fathers, a lot of times there needs to be extra outreach and different kinds of communication for men in the workplace to feel like work-family policies are also for them. And then, again, engaging supervisors and managers from different parts of the organization is really, really important. And as you said, if we don't do those things, if we don't message around work life that it's a core, important business initiative, it's not just a nice-to-have add-on, then we're not going to be as successful. The other thing that's really important is you can message all you'd like, but if you don't really have follow-through on your programs, they kind of fall away. I liken it to a New Year's resolution. We can have the best of intentions on January 1st, but where is it, May now? How many of us are really doing our New Year's resolutions? The people who do build a structure around it, right? The gym membership, right, helps you exercise more because it's a structure that underlies your intention. So, ultimately, I think we can message all we want. We could talk about our intentions, but employees have to feel like the intentions are really being followed through upon. So we can have a parental leave policy saying we support working parents, and then women come back to the workplace and they have no place to, pump milk. Or they have, they're not afforded, a gradual return that allows them to, kind of get used to their new working mother status. And if people don't have those types of secondary supports, then the primary program is not seen as authentic or as effective.
You recently published a book called The Working Dad Survival Guide.
Yeah.
But what can organizations learn from that work as well?
Sure. Well, the Working Dad Survival Guide is written for the working parent, in this case the working dad, and it's advice and encouragement for them in trying to navigate the workplace, navigate home life, think through their priorities, and then also how to build support structures for themselves. So that's the primary audience. However, I think it has a lot of implications for organizations and for managers. So, for example, men's concerns when it comes to work and family is often invisible in organizations because men are acculturated not to talk about the things they're struggling with, but also in many workplaces it's not kind of safe for dads to out themselves as highly involved parents in many places. So the first lesson is we need to bring these issues to the surface. We need to talk about these issues. It's completely normal for men to care both about having a successful career and be like highly involved parents that they always wanted to be. And if we acknowledge that, we make it safer to talk about that at work, things are going to solve itself. But in addition, in the book, we talk about some strategies that dads can use in negotiating for workplace flexibility. There's certainly a managerial component there about, what is important for employees, how can we better accommodate them, how can we help ensure that if someone is using flexibility formally or informally, that they're still included, that they're not stigmatized as kind of less than fully all in at work or less than fully manly, which is some of the implications that have prevented men from standing up in this regard. But I think ultimately, the big picture lesson for organizations is work-family programs should be for everyone, not just for working moms. And a lot of times they're designed by women because of just who does these programs. And the primary audience in many cases, first person you think of is a working mom. But we have to get around those biases. And if we think about, how can we devise a program that's also attractive to dads and to men? How can we get some men involved in planning our programs? How can we get them involved in setting up support groups or employee resource groups and things like that? So maybe for organizations, the most important implication is just the recognition that work families for men too, and we need to involve men throughout the process of maybe thinking about our work family and work-life policies.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, thank you so much.
For World at Work TV, I'm Allison Avalos.